Hello, boys and girls of Credit Union Land, and welcome to episode 24 of the CUInsight Experience. My name is Randy Smith. I am one of the co-founders and the publisher of CUInsight.com, and it is my job on the show to have conversations with the best and the brightest of the credit union community, and from time to time, even some people outside. This happens to be one of those episodes. I get to pick their brains and see if we can't find a few nuggets that we can all learn from. My guest on today's show is John Spence. John is recognized as one of the top business thought leaders and leadership development experts in the world. He was named by the American Management Association as one of the top 50 leaders to watch, along with the names of Sergey Brin and Larry Page of Google and Jeff Bezos of Amazon. Pretty impressive. As a consultant and coach to organizations worldwide, he works with startups to the Fortune 10. John is dedicated to helping people in their businesses be more successful by making the very complex awesomely simple. That happens to be the name of his book that Dan Berger mentioned on episode 3 of the podcast as a book that he gifts and recommends to people often. I went out and bought it, read it. I think you should too. After the show, Dan said, you should try to get John on the podcast. And here we are today. This entire episode is all about leadership and life hacks. We still made time in the end for the rapid fire questions, so don't worry. But man, I'm telling you, there are so many nuggets for you to choose from that you're going to probably want to have a notepad and write some of these down. Listening to John will make us all better leaders. So without further ado, I give you my conversation with John Spence. Enjoy. John, thank you so much for being on the show. After speaking with Dan and Anthony over at NAFCU, I was so excited about this.
Well, I'm excited too, Randy. Thank you for having me on the show.
There were so many directions. After Dan was on episode 3 of the podcast, and he mentioned your book, Awesomely Simple, is one that he's gifted the most to other people. I instantly had to go out and buy it. I've now ordered more copies, as I was telling you beforehand, for people on my crew. And there was so much good information. When I was putting together some questions, I really had to stop myself from just making this a whole thing about scratch my own itch questions as a business owner. So and try to keep them a little bit broader. But the place that I wanted to start was you talked so much about the importance of communication. And I think across the board, we hear that, whether it's business relations, personal relationships. Could you, to our listeners, why is that such kind of a linchpin of what you believe?
Well, and it's funny, Randy, it doesn't matter whether it's a small business all the way up. The bigger the business, the more complex the communication is and the more problems they have. I do a thing called an organizational effectiveness audit when I work with a business. It's about 28 questions based on, all the things I've learned through the years. And I always tell them, before you even take this, your score on communication is going to be terrible, because I've never seen one that wasn't. So interestingly enough, a couple of things is when I look at communications, and there's a couple words I use: open, honest, robust. You want transparency, you want candor, and you want everybody communicating as much as you possibly can. It's almost impossible to over communicate. Really, seriously. But I have something new to add to this, which is super interesting. I just did a research project of about several thousand high potential employees at organizations all over the world. And I asked them what they look for in a leader they would willingly follow. And there were 7 items, but one of them was communication. And they said, of course, I expect my leader to be able to tell us about the vision, mission, values, the strategy, make complex things simple. But they said the single most important thing I look for in a leader around communications is that they ask great questions and that they're an intense listener, that they're curious. They want to know what you're thinking. They want feedback. They want ideas. They want input. Then they actually listen to it carefully and implement some of the ideas you gave them. So it's always a weakness in a company, and it's got to be something that's focused on, because if you're not communicating well, it's hard to build a good team, build a good culture, and run a successful credit union.
You talked about in the book, like being an extreme listener. And I think you gave a tip about like kind of repeating in your head what somebody had said. And I was like, oh, that's helpful because I tend to have the problem of thinking about what I'm going to say instead of listening. And it's a constant struggle to bring myself back. But that was a nugget from the book that I'm like, I can do that. And I found myself doing it. So I appreciate that.
Listening is really, really, really hard. I've got a new one that I use, and it's helped me a ton, which is when someone's saying something, I start thinking of those things, and then I try to catch myself. Before I speak, I always ask myself this. Is what I'm about to say right now going to add any value at all to this conversation? Is this something that's important, something they need to hear, or is it just something I want to talk about that I want to hear myself say, some story that I think is amazing or some piece of advice? And I'll tell you, I've really learned to do that well. And now about 60% of the time, maybe 70% of the time, I realize that what I was going to say was not important at all, just didn't add any value. So I just don't say it. And it works in personal life and extremely well in business too.
That's something that I'm going to have to keep working on. So I appreciate that. When you mentioned the questionnaire, it kind of led into the next question that I was planning on asking you. As you said, people score poorly on communication, and you tell them that in advance. Is that the biggest mistake you see corporate America as a whole making, or is there something that sticks out to you that, like, when you go into a company, you're like, there's a 90% chance that they're doing this poorly?
Yes. Communication is just, it's a given. it's everybody's going to have that. Some companies are better than others, but there's always room for improvement. Now, the biggest problem I see right now in organizations of every size all around the world is lack of, and it's sort of a dual thing, accountability and disciplined execution. I've been teaching a class at the Wharton School of Business now for about 19 years. It's an executive level class, SIFMA, Securities and Financial Management Association. It's all bankers. That's all it is, from major banks. And every year I ask them the same question. What percentage of companies that have a good plan, a good strategy, that got great products and services, effectively executes their plan? Want to take a guess, Randy?
I'd say it's pretty low. Is it
5 to 10%?
Yeah, wow.
Yeah. So it's that lack of accountability, which leads to a lack of execution. That is the single biggest problem I see in companies I work with.
In my conversations with both Dan and Anthony, they both mentioned accountability, and that was, something that I was like really digging into, because even as a small business owner, it's, the metrics to measure and to hold people accountable. Is there something you use, or is there tricks or hacks that you use to, if like many of these bankers, we're lacking in that you'd recommend to start that ball, moving forward when you work with somebody?
Yeah. The couple of key things about metrics. Just because you can measure it doesn't mean you should. Okay. I work with a lot of people who got 57 metrics. Now, really, on most companies, most credit unions, 4, 5 metrics maybe. I'm coaching the CEO of a credit union right now, and they had about 18. We've gotten it down to the top 4 and realized that if those 4 metrics are on, the rest of them have already been taken care of. So, it's sort of another thing about metrics is just because it's really hard to measure it doesn't mean you get to skip it. And the idea here is you want to be able to build your metrics and your measurements and your strategy, obviously. And the key word I use for metrics is binary. It's 1, 0, black, white, yes, no, no guessing. One of my very favorite business phrases is ambiguity breeds mediocrity. So when we look at metrics, it's things like number of deposits, membership growth. Did this plan go on at the appropriate time? Was our marketing plan released at the right time? What's our net promoter score? How many likes on our Facebook page? And when it's really hard sometimes because it's qualitative, not quantitative, all I do is I go to my team and say, you guys figure out how to measure it. How do we measure super happy members? Well, obviously net promoter score, but is there something else we want to put on that? Or how do we measure being a great team member? And that's pretty easy. You create a survey of all the people on the team members where they rate each other on collaboration, communication, integrity, things like that. And now we have a quantitative score on what might be a qualitative aspect. But it's only a couple of measures. They got to be binary, and they got to tie directly into the strategy.
just was popping into my head. When you're doing a survey or something of that nature on like the happiness of, the team or, and, working together, is it like a 1 to 10 scale? Is it just a yes or no? I mean,
Yeah, I use a Likert scale of strongly disagree, disagree somewhat, not sure, agree, and then strongly agree. And then when I tell people, when you look at this, not sure, disagree, and strongly disagree are all negative answers. Do we have a clear, vivid, compelling vision and strategy for growth? Not sure. Well, that's not what I want to hear.
You know what that means.
I prefer that you strongly agreed with that. Yeah.
I was listening to another podcast in the past month, and the guy was talking about, like, if you're at a restaurant or you're asking for somebody's opinion, like, if you give the scale of 1 to 10, tell them to take out 7. They can't answer 7. And he's like, because if they give you an 8, that's a good score. If it's a 6, you start to question. It's kind of like that, not sure, right? So, and
yeah, I do a lot of, when I work with small groups inside of organizations, I'll do a lot of quick audits while we're doing it.
Yeah.
And I'll say it's on a scale of 1 to 10. And if it's between a 7 and an 8, it's a 6.
It's a 6. Right?
It's
Exactly.
6.
This is very similar,
knock
right?
it down a couple numbers. So, yeah.
Oh, I absolutely love that. The next place, and this, again, it was so fun after reading your book. Cause like I said, I spoke with Dan originally, read the book, and then spoke with Dan and Anthony, who've worked with you. And they're such great guys. When they were talking, I mean, again, about accountability, they mentioned holding people accountable, right? As well. So I did want to circle back to that. I guess, could you share a little bit more about, like, when you're now measuring, how are you holding people accountable, in the organization?
Cool. Well, first, let's say that a lot of people don't hold other people accountable because they don't want to be mean. They don't want to be aggressive. They don't want to hurt somebody's feelings. So creating those binary goals, binary metrics, takes all the emotion and politics and opinion out of it. You either did it or you didn't, Randy. I love you, man. We fish together. We hang out. We drink beer. You're great. The marketing plan was supposed to be dropped on the 10th. It's now the 20th. It's not me versus you. It's me and you versus the agreed upon goal.
Yep.
So there's 5 steps to creating a culture of accountability. Step 1 is and these are for mission critical things. If I ask you to run out and give me some donuts, we're not going to go through the 5 steps.
Right.
But if, you're going to grow membership by 30%, now we're going to talk it through. So step 1 is 100% clarity plus appropriate authority and resources. In other words, I'm going to sit down with you and I'm going to explain in the most detail I can possibly get specifically what I want you to do, what the outcome is, how we're going to measure it. Another word, and I think this goes both for individual insight and business, credit unions and businesses, managing expectations. I think a lot of times internally we don't do a good job of that. I also think we do a bad job not managing the expectations of our members or customers. And what happens then is we think we're delivering excellence, and they're like, yeah, this is about the same as a cold pizza.
Yep.
You're like, oh, we rock. And they're going, not so much.
No.
So managing expectations. So step 1 is 100% clarity, appropriate authority, resources. I sit down and I go, this is the metric. This is the timeline. Here's the budget. Here's the decision-making authority you have. Here's all the resources. I describe in detail and then make sure they have it. Step 2 then is 100% agreement. The person has to look back at you, and typically I tell them to write notes on everything, and they have to be able to read back to you and say, Randy, this is what you're holding me accountable for. You want this done by this date. This is how you're going to measure it. Here's who's on my team. This is the budget, blah, 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 blah. The last 2 lines are, I believe this is a reasonable goal. I accept 100% accountability. And then when you write all that out, you both sign it. It's not a contract. It's a promise between 2 professionals that we're going to get this done. It's what I call an accountability agreement. Now that we've got those 2 things in place, step 3 then is track and post. This is the way that we, and track and post is, I'm going to track everything you're doing, the most important goals, not everything in the whole credit union, but the most important goals. And then we're going to post it everywhere for everyone to see. And it's got to be really easy to understand, like green, yellow, red. Yep. So I can look at the major goals of the credit union or at your major goals. If I'm managing you, I wouldn't put yours up there. But I could look, I don't want to embarrass people per se. If they're, if it's a department or whatever, so everybody knows who's responsible for that department. And here's the key is when you start to track and post like that, a bunch of people are really excited. Like, I'm green, I'm green, green, green. Everything's always great. The big group of people in the middle freak out because they're like, you're going to track everything and then you're going to post it. And then you've got about 10% of the team that's going to go, this isn't fair. there. You can't do that. And you go, it's been a pleasure working with you. And you, as my Canadian friends say, you love them right out the door, or you make them available to industry. Whatever it might be.
For their next opportunity, right?
Yeah. We're going to open up a new opportunity for you.
Yes, yes.
So we've got 100% clarity and appropriate authority resources, 100% agreement, track and post. Now, what do you do about that big group in the middle that's freaked out? That's step number 4, which is coach, mentor, train, support. When someone slips from green to yellow, you don't yell at them. They don't get in trouble. You don't get mad. You run over to help them. You don't do their job for them, but you say, do you need more resources? Do you need more assistance? Did I not clarify something? And everybody comes to help them. What happens then is people who thought that tracking equals punishment now realize that tracking equals help, and that we want everybody in the credit union to stay in the green. So if you slip to yellow, everybody has a stake in getting you back into green. And then after that, the last step is celebrate success. When someone, is held accountable, they do a great job, they're green, they deliver, give them a handwritten note, a pat on the back, a dinner out with their, significant other, and a cash bonus, whatever it might be, a promotion. But then you also deal decisively with mediocrity. If someone is consistently yellow, red, and you're coaching, mentoring, training, supporting them, doing everything, and they don't get out of there, at least when they leave the organization, everybody knows that you treated them fairly, which means that if they start to mess up, you will treat them fairly too. I don't quote a lot of CEOs and stuff, but I've got a favorite Jack Welch quote. I never fired anybody who was surprised.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I've not heard that one, actually. In this first section of the show, I have one final question for you, but I wanted to make sure to get it in. Could you share with our listeners your 4 moments of truth?
It's different for every organization.
Okay.
For like a restaurant, it's great food, great service, reasonable price, extremely clean. And as long as the food is great, I do a workshop around this, but let's say you go someplace, the service is amazing. They seat you right away. They get you what you need. They take your drink order. The food comes out. It's awesome. I mean, it's really delicious. The prices are super reasonable. And then you get it and go to the bathroom, and it's disgusting in there. And as soon as the bathroom is dirty, what's the first thing that goes through your mind?
Oh, that the kitchen must be too, right?
So for a restaurant, you've got to get all 4 of those. If you do a lot of other stuff, you got paintings and flowers, and that's all nice. Yeah. But if you mess up one of those 4, you lose the customer forever. So you look at a financial institution. I want things timely. I want them accurate. I want friendly service, personalized, and I want convenience. There might be a few others, but basically, I want it done right. I want it easy. I want to be treated well, and I want it to be accurate.
Yep.
You do those 4 things, pretty much the member's going to be happy.
Oh, that's awesome. I'd like to transition into the second part, which is about leadership and life hacks, much like what we've been talking about, but it gives myself and our listeners a little background on you and kind of the path that you took to get where you are today. So the first question, and one that I always ask, what was your path to consulting, coaching, author, speaker? How'd you get here?
How much time do you have? I'll shorten the story down because it's kind of interesting. I grew up in Miami, Florida, very wealthy family. My father was a malpractice attorney. Went to one of the top prep schools in the country. Went to the school at the University of Miami because it was close to my boat and my girlfriend. Not why you should choose your university.
How you choose a college, right?
I failed out of the University of Miami. I came and applied at the University of Florida, where they laughed at me, literally laughed at me. I went to a community college in Gainesville called Santa Fe, then got into U of F, graduated number 3 in the United States, was hired by the Rockefellers. I became CEO of an International Rockefeller Foundation at the age of 26. I did that for a couple of years, and then I was asked to take over a major consulting firm at 33 years old. And my job was to travel around the world and help Fortune 100 companies close deals of $100 million or larger. And that led me into doing speaking and other stuff. I'm very introverted. I don't like giving speeches. I do it every week. The largest group I've ever spoken to is 26,000.
Wow.
But I did a lunch and learn for one of my friends yesterday for 26 people, and I sweated through my shirt.
You and I, a couple of introverts. Yeah. I'm the same way. It shocks people because of, like while I'm at conferences and all of that and the public thing. And I'm always said that I'm an introvert that plays an extrovert on TV. And it was the biggest shock to my girlfriend that, like, when I come home from events, I need about as much time to unwind as I did that I was there. So,
oh yeah, it's crushing. It's when I do a big speech to a couple thousand people, it's crushing. But I've dedicated my life to helping businesses be more successful. So I'm happy to help. I mean, I'm there because I believe I have information and ideas and things that can truly make their businesses better, make their lives better. So I'm willing to push through the pain. People always say, if I just get one nugget, everything was worth it. Yeah. I want them to get about 10. So I'm willing to go through the pain to be able to know that I was able to give people ideas that will significantly help their business and their lives improve.
So I am throwing this out there to you. So feel free, I hope you're willing to answer. As I've talked more about being an introvert in an extroverted world, it's funny how many other people share that same, like they get up and then they need to like remove themselves, right? In a sense, or we go stand in the corner and talk to one person, so it's, do you have any hacks or things that you do to get yourself up to it?
Yes.
Just, that you could share or you're willing to share?
Yeah. First of all, there's a new term called an ambivert. And an ambivert is someone who can switch between the two when necessary. Yep. So that would be me and you.
Absolutely.
I'm highly introverted. I work alone in my office. I don't want any people around me. Typically, when I finish a speech, I get off the stage, shake a few people's hands, and run from the room. But here's the key is, and it's going to sound awkward, but when you're working with other people and trying to help them, you just got to love them.
Yep.
You got to say, I'm here to help. In my mind, I'm always saying, I'm here to help. I love you. I'm doing everything I can. And then be curious. I don't like to be put on the spot. So I want to learn about other people. What are you doing? What's happening in your life? What's happening in your business? If I can keep focusing on them, then it makes it easier for me because it's awkward when people focus on me.
I understand that. That's a great advice right there. To kind of go back, how has the inspiration changed for you? You've been doing this for quite some time now, with time on the job.
30 years.
Yeah, 30 years. So over the past 30 years, how has the inspiration changed? What keeps you going and motivated, each day?
What keeps me going and motivated is when I go to an organization, I know it gets stronger so it can take care of all the people there. I was talking to a friend of mine that was a CEO the other day, and he said, when do you know you're truly committed to leadership? And I said, it's when you put a stake in the ground and realize, like I used to realize, I have 60 kids to put through college. Now, I don't have kids, but I looked at my folks and said, I have to take care of all these folks. Their financial future, their kids' future, all that stuff, their stability, their family stuff is my responsibility to make sure we run a great organization. So I'm inspired to go in every day and help people be better leaders, run better businesses, because the more the business or the credit union flourishes, the better job they can take care of their employees, their community, and that ripple effect is really cool. And I was talking to a friend the other day, the way I sort of view myself is people are standing at a door they can't get through, and I got this giant thing of keys on my hip, and I can go over and open the door for them. I can't make them go through it, but at least I can open the door and say, here's the path forward here. Because a lot of people, I've worked in several hundred companies in my career. I've been the CEO of 6. So 3 of them multinational. I've had a broad exposure. Many people have only worked in 1 or 2 companies or one industry their entire life. I could take something that works over here that someone in the credit union has never heard of.
Yep.
Oh, this is from the marine industry. This is from the food service industry. This is a great idea to bring to your credit union. And they're like, I never would have thought of that. It's because I'm climbing around in all those companies, learning the best practices of every one of them.
That is good stuff. Is there, like, if you think back to maybe your time as like the first time you were a CEO at the Rockefeller Foundation, was there a mistake that you made and maybe one that you see other young leaders making over and over again? That, the experience time on the job, it's just part of it, right? So,
yeah, the biggest mistake I made early in made 2 mistakes. Number one is I wanted to make all the decisions. I remember sitting at my desk and looking, there was a line of my employees out the hallway waiting for me to make the decision. And then I realized I was the bottleneck and I had to trust my people and delegate. I was the one holding the company back. And I had great people. That company, that organization would not have been successful without my team. They were awesome and they made me look good, which is pretty cool. The other thing is early in my career, I always thought I was right. And I would fight people, say, well, I read this in a book and I did this and I did this and I'm right. Now I realize I don't know anything.
It's funny how that happens as we get older, right? How little we know.
Less confident of my knowledge every day.
We were so smart at about 15, 16. So
every book I read go, here's 4 more I got to read because I don't understand this at all.
That I understand. Has your view, you've been training leaders for a long time. Has your view on leadership changed even in that? Like, is that something that you're constantly learning, refreshing?
Yeah, actually, the practice of leadership has changed pretty dramatically. When I entered the workforce in 1989, it was pretty much all command and control, what we would call Theory X. Do as I say, not as I do.
Yeah.
I remember when my boss said jump, it was how high, how many times, sir? Then it swung for many years to management by spreadsheet. Everything was numbers. People were head count. It was totally impersonal, and it was just, you got to make your numbers. And if you weren't, reduce head count. In other words, go fire 100 people. Today, it's sort of swung back to a term called servant leadership, where it's flipped on its head, where instead of the leader being at the top of the pyramid, everybody else below him, it's now the leader at the base supporting everyone else above them. And I could not be happier. I said it before, but that's where a leader leads through persuasion and integrity and values and love. And they get people who willingly follow them, not because of their rank, their title, their position, but because the leader's taking care of them and making them more successful. And when you make your people more successful, you make your organization more successful.
Oh, that's awesome. Has there been a piece of advice or a life lesson that you received that you find yourself going back to over and over again?
Yeah, I did a TED Talk on this. It's the most important thing I've ever learned in my life. Ready?
Ready.
You become what you focus on and like the people you surround yourself with. Whatever you're reading, whatever you're studying, whatever you're learning, whatever you fill your mind with, and whoever you choose to spend your time with directly determines what your life will look like a decade from now.
That's wow. We will link to the TED Talk as well. So I haven't watched that yet, but I'm looking forward to it. That's awesome.
It tells my whole college story of failing out and what I learned to go from failing out of college to being a CEO of a multinational company in the thing of about 6 years.
Yeah.
And there were 3 things I learned: read, ask for help, and then that last one, you become what you focus on and like the people you surround yourself with. Those are the 3 most important things.
That's I've heard that said before in a different way, that you're the average of the 5 people you surround yourself with, right? Like, so
exactly it.
Any memorable failures? You mentioned flunking out of Miami, but
any out of college was probably
probably might have been one of them. But any like a memorable failure that when you look back now, you're like, I'm glad that happened that way because the rest of us wouldn't be here.
Yeah. When I was first working at the Rockefeller Foundation, I had no idea what in the world I was doing. And Mr. Rockefeller knew that, and he assigned his right-hand man, a guy named Charlie Owen, who was the advisor to Mr. Rockefeller, assigned him to me to be my mentor. And Charlie was the guy that would come in every Monday, put a business book on my desk and say, I will see you on Friday. You must make a book report. And on Friday, I would tell him what I learned in the book. And then here's the thing that he did that was different than everybody else. He would say, what are the 3 things you're going to apply out of the book you just read? And I would tell him, he would write them down and say, you will now be held accountable for doing that in your job. So for 6 years, every Monday I got a book. Every Friday I made a book report. And the next Monday, I was held accountable for implementing what I'd learned. My biggest failure then was I blew up a project. I made the wrong decision. I made the wrong call. And I lost what would have been the equivalent of about 7 years of my salary. And, I'm in my mid-20s.
Yeah.
That's devastating.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I'm a dead man here. My time as CEO has just ended abruptly. And Charlie came in and said, no, that was great. That was fantastic. You made the wrong call. Actually, he said, I think you made the right call, but it turned out wrong. But you took a risk and you failed massively, and I'm proud of you. And that was the biggest financial mistake I've ever made, and also one of the biggest learnings that it's just money, and it was a prudent risk, and it just went the wrong way, and nobody died.
Yeah.
So just get up tomorrow and let's make more money.
So something I was thinking about as you were talking about the book report and the 3 action steps that you were then held accountable, was that the basis for your accountability agreement when we're talking about earlier in the show?
A little bit. I put more detail around it, writing it all out. But here's the thing that I see a lot. People read books and they go, great book, all these neat ideas. And they're like, what'd you do with it? Years ago, I was teaching at a company in Texas, so I got to do the impersonation. And I'm starting to go over Jim Collins' Good to Great, the 3 circles of the hedgehog concept. And the CEO goes, whoa, John, don't need to cover that. We all read it, went through a class. Hell, we brought Jim Collins in to teach us to us, $60,000. And I said, okay, then, sir, could you please explain the flywheel doom loop to me? And he went, what? I said, oh, okay, then Stockdale paradox. Yeah, I love that part of the book. Yep. How are you guys using the Stockdale paradox? He goes, the what? And I said, well, sir, I don't mean to be an ass, but if you can't remember the parts of the book, I'm having a hard time believing that you're executing them effectively.
You've applied them, right?
And that's what I see a lot. So that lesson of writing things down and then putting them down as action steps and starting to implement them is the major difference between what I call the knowing-doing gap. It's one thing to know the information. It's a completely different thing to implement it and execute it effectively.
Oh, that is good stuff. There's a question that I've asked on every show that as I was writing it down for you, I started to think if I've been asking the wrong question. And it was after, reading Awesomely Simple. Like I asked the question, how do you as a leader keep your message fresh to your team and also like to a credit union CEO, to your members and, the community? I'll tell you where the question originally came from was we just had our 10-year anniversary as a company. You start to look at like a refresh of you kind of look back, but look forward, like what's the next 10 years, and the messaging was, I was starting to question if our message was getting stale. When I was reading your book, there's so much about having a concise message that you repeat over and over in everything that you do. And it brought me back to a conversation that I've had with Dan before where he mentioned extreme member service over and over. And I'm like, wow, I wonder if that's something you picked up from John. So,
yes, it is.
So to my question, is refreshing the message important, or is it more about the consistency of the message in your opinion?
Okay, so to me, there's 3 different levels to that. The values of an organization should never change. That should be consistent for 10 years, 15 years, 20 years. You might tweak them slightly to change the verbiage, but you can't change the values. The mission probably doesn't change much either. You serve your community through your credit union. You help people out. The vision of where you want to go, that can change. And every 10 years, maybe every 5 years, it's a good idea to push it out and change it. But the messaging around the values, extreme customer or extreme member focus, things like that, you say it every way you can, over and over, all the time. Change the way you describe it, but never change the full message. And use every platform: email, text, videos. If I'm the CEO of a credit union, I'd grab my phone and sit at my desk. Go, hey everybody, it's Thursday the 15th, and I just want to remind you, here's 4 things we always focus on. This is what drives the success of our credit union. I might get a testimonial from one of our members and ask them to talk about it. But I've said this before. I've said it to Dan. You heard it. When you get to the point that if you feel like you say the message around the mission, vision, values, strategy one more time, you're going to vomit. That's when the lowest person in the credit union heard it for the very first time.
For the first time, I remember reading that in the book. Yeah. So you're just getting started at that point, right?
You live around the strategy and stuff. Yeah. You and the senior management team are always talking about it. One of the folks that works down on the counter servicing the members or works up in accounting or something, they don't hear it that often. Yeah. Maybe once every 6 months. So you got to keep that communication line open.
That is good. That was something that stuck out to me when I was reading the book. If you have a free day, nothing on the calendar, what passions do you have outside of coaching and reading about business? And what do you do to recharge?
Fly fishing.
Fly fishing. Okay.
I'm a fanatic fly fisherman, and I'm very good about turning it off. I work until I'm so tired I can't stand it, and then I vacation until I'm so bored I can't stand it. But I have the ability to drive that line. But if I have an extra day, I'm going to be out somewhere trying to go fly fishing. Oh,
that's beautiful. All right, so I want to be respectful of your time. Getting into part 3, it's the rapid fire questions. I like to have a lot of fun with these. The questions are rapid. Your answers don't have to be. Do you remember the first time that you got into trouble, like memorable trouble that you're able to share with us?
Yeah, I wrecked my mom's car when I was 16.
Did you?
Yeah.
That would do it.
Yeah. She's as long as everybody's okay, it's just a car.
Yep.
We can get a new one. But having to tell my mom that I think I'd only been driving for like a month and a half, that I ran into a rock and crushed her car wasn't a really happy moment in her life.
One of the stories I remember, I think I'd only had my license for about that same amount of time. And in a left-hand turn lane, I got rear-ended. And when the lady that did that saw how young I was, that when the police came, she was like, he did it, and blamed me the whole time. And I was like, I don't even know what's going on. And then I remember my father came to get me, and the cop came up and was like, yeah, you guys probably want to leave. She is not going to be happy, but every bit of glass is in the left-hand turn lane. What she's saying is not true. So it was like, oh, this does actually work. So, but it was one of those two where I'm like, I'm going to get in trouble for something that I didn't even do. So, yeah. Do you have any, I just went down a rabbit hole, but hey, that's what we do here. Do you have any daily routines that if you don't do, your day just feels off?
Yeah. Every morning I get up and go to breakfast. I have the same thing every day: 1 egg, 1 sausage patty, 1 piece of dry whole wheat toast, and I read for an hour. I use a thing called Flipboard on my iPad, and it consolidates all the news things. So I read Fortune, Forbes, Inc., Strategy and Business, Entrepreneur, World Business Forum, Business Insider, Harvard Business Review every single day. I'm completely caught up on all the articles there. So that's my ritual. I always have to have an hour just to make sure that I'm as up to date as I can humanly be on the information I'm learning.
So do you do anything? Do you take notes on what you're seeing? Do you action steps like you talked about before when you were doing the book reviews? I mean, is there something, or is it just that's how you're just generally being informed day to day?
I do 2 things. I post it all to social media so that people see that I'm studying and learning every day. Then what I do is when it's a really good article that I want to take action on, if there's something just interesting, I'll throw it to social media. This is something I know, but it's a good, thing for it. I put it on my Twitter and all that stuff. But if it's really good, I email the article to myself. Then I use another tool called Evernote, which allows you to clip it and put it into categories. Yep. And then what I'll do, if it's really good, is I will I'll transfer it into a Word document. I'll highlight just the parts I think are really important. Then I erase the rest of the article. And I've got one sheet with all the best ideas, all the best notes. And then I take that again and save it to a file of, like, I've got a file on leadership that has several hundred 2-paragraph, 3-paragraph ideas that I want to take away and implement.
Gosh, I use Evernote for everything. So
do I.
We will link to that. If people are not using it, you should. And we don't get paid for saying that. The random question: what's the best album of all time? The one you can listen to without skipping a song.
Anything by Sister Hazel.
Really? Do you have a favorite?
I'm friends with the band. I love their music before I met them. Yeah. And now that I know Ken Block and the rest of the team, I have a real special connection to their music. So anything by Sister Hazel.
Anything. All right. If somebody hasn't listened to them, what's the album you tell them to get first?
I think it's called Change Your Mind. Okay. But I know the songs. I don't know the albums.
Yeah. Yep. I understand that. It's most of us don't know the albums anymore, right? Because
I just buy it. If it comes out by Sister Hazel, I buy it. I put it on in my iTunes.
And you're listening to it.
Put it there, and I just listen to everything.
So I was excited to ask this question to you. It's one that I ask everyone. I'm a big reader. I know you are from reading the book, even how much in what we've talked about today. Is there a book, like you mentioned Good to Great, is there a book besides your own that you've recommended or gifted to people over your lifetime that you just think everybody should read?
Yeah, the one that I recommend and gift all the time has nothing to do with business. It's called The Prophet by Kahlil Gibran, and it's a Sufi poetry. Yeah. And you hear it a lot in weddings about the tension between, the bow and the arrow and all the things. It's just a really cool book. I've probably read it 100 times. There's another book I love. There's a couple I keep on my nightstand. The Prophet, another one I read all the time is A Strategy for Daily Living by Ari Kiev. Okay. And he was a psychologist. And people just came and said, you're trying to help me, but couldn't you just give me a simple list of things I can do to make my life better? So he did that. And then the last one probably be Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning. That
would be probably one that I've recommended to personally.
But if you go to my website, I have a place there you can get the top 150 business books I've ever read.
We will link to your books, obviously, but we'll link to the website with that book list as well. You're gonna make Amazon very happy with the ones that I have to order. So. I can't believe I'm drawing a blank on this that I mentioned in a different podcast. I heard a Japanese word that basically means there's not an English equivalent for it, but it's basically hoarding books that you're going to read at some point.
Oh yeah, I saw that too.
Did you see that?
Yeah, I don't remember the word either.
I'll Google it for the show notes again, but it's I'm like, oh, yeah, that's me. I swear we have a stack that we've been recommended that we need to read, and then everything goes on the bookshelves afterwards, but they don't make it to the bookshelves until it does. So yeah, I was excited to ask you that question. As you've gotten older, what's become more important to you, and has anything become less important?
The thing that's become much, much, much more important to me is humility. I had a pretty stellar career early in my career, and I won't say I was totally egotistical, but I was pretty confident. And every year I realized how little I know and how hard it is to continue to stay up. And I've won a bunch of awards, and the awards really don't mean much to me anymore. The only thing that means is doing better at my craft, trying to improve just for me, to push myself to see, can I get better at what I do and add more value and be a craftsperson? I see it as almost an art of what I do. So I've become much more humble, and I need to become more humble. And the one thing I wouldn't do, or the one thing I've learned not to do, waste time on people that are not of value.
Yeah.
That if someone is stressed and angry and mad and nasty and really stressful in my life, if I can't help them get better, then I need to remove myself from that. I will make the effort because you need to, but after that, it's time to walk away and make sure that I'm happy.
It's amazing when you remove negativity from your life, how much brighter it gets. So I know that personally. There's a question that I don't send. Who's the first person that you think of when you hear the word success?
Wow, that's hard. I would think of maybe Richard Branson.
Okay.
Something like that. Not because of the money, but because he seems to have built a lot of really good companies with good culture. And he's having a lot of fun.
He does. He has a lot of fun.
That's, to building an empire while doing it, treating people well, having fun, giving back, and taking a lot of cool risks. That would be success to me. But I have a different definition of success than most people. Most people is money, fame, and power. I think those things are nice and it's cool to have them. But my definition is when your core values and self-concept are in harmony with your daily actions and behaviors. In other words, you've identified some values that you hold very, very dearly, and you've got a clear picture of the kind of life you really want to live and the kind of person you want to be, and you get up every day and you actually do that. If you become rich, famous, and powerful, and like Richard Branson, you got islands in the Bahamas and jet, that's nice. If you have none of that, but you can put your head on your pillow at night and say, I didn't go violate my values today. I didn't put on a mask. I was authentic, and I really like the way my life is going. It's not perfect, but it's really, really good. Then I believe you are extremely successful.
A few episodes back, we did a special Mother's Day one, and Jill Nowacki, who was on it, she talked about doing a values exercise on knowing your own personal mission value statement. And she actually came in just a few days back and did one with my team where it was like working on their, not just the company side, but the actual, what are your personal values? Something that I've said often and I just wholeheartedly believe is that we all measure success differently. So there's that, for you and me, it sounds like it's a little bit different than what, it's not just the money and the whatever it happens to be, so that's fantastic. The last question I have for you today, I thank you so much again for being on the show. Do you have any final asks or final thoughts for our listeners?
Share this podcast.
I appreciate
if you
that.
liked the information we covered, share it with everybody in the world. And then I'd love it if you signed up for my newsletter. I've got a really cool newsletter that is run by artificial intelligence. And in the mornings when I read, I post everything to Twitter, only the best stuff I'm reading. My newsletter picks that up and picks out the best stuff. And then you, Randy, if you read it and you were really interested in culture, it tracks what articles you open and how long you read them, then starts to fill the newsletter with the stuff that's more important to you. So your newsletter would be completely different than anyone else's in the world. and because it would pick the articles that are most important to you. So just go to my website, sign up for my blog/newsletter. It's free. But it's been extremely popular with people.
That sounds awesome. I'm gonna sign up, and we will link to that in the show notes as well, and everything else we talked about today. I think there's going to be a lot of links, so which is fantastic. Is at Awesomely Simple on Twitter the best way for people to get a hold of you if they have more questions, or do you have a preferred method of contact?
Yeah, just send me a personal email. My email is john@johnspence.com. I answer everything myself. Two things there is I do get quite a few emails, so it might take me a few days to get back to you. And I'm serious about this. If it's really important or urgent and you need help right now, just type important or urgent in all caps, and I will do it immediately.
Oh, well,
immediately. And then the other thing I like to say is if I don't have the answer, I can find somebody who does. I have a pretty broad network all over the world. And I can reach out to somebody and say, I don't know anything about this. Does anybody I know something? And try to get the answer to the person. So just send me an email. I'm on the team to help.
That was something I did when I was reading your book too, is talking about the network to have people that, answer those questions. People should read your book. Obviously, I was a big fan of it. So again, thank you very much.
I hadn't read it in years. I wrote that 10 years ago.
Yeah.
And like last year, I picked it up and said, I'm pretty nervous here because that was a long time ago. I wrote that, and I read through it on a plane. I'm like, hey, this is pretty good.
That's pretty good stuff. Yeah,
there's some good information in here.
I will tell you what, I didn't realize, I guess, that you wrote it 10 years ago. It's held up very well. I found all kinds of nuggets through there. So
I was pretty worried.
It's fantastic. Again, John, thank you so much for doing this. I greatly appreciate it. I've enjoyed this conversation so much. I hope you have a fantastic day.
And you as well. Thank you very much, Randy. It's been an honor. It really has.
Thank you, John.